So in this lecture, we want to investigate what are the determinants of price elasticity of demand and why are some goods more price elastic than others. And before we get into that, I'll say that generally the price elasticity of demand is an empirical question. So you actually have to measure it by looking at people's demand in response to price. But there are a few guiding principles that typically hold true. So the first is that price elasticity is higher when close substitutes are available. Second, price elasticity is higher for narrowly defined goods compared to more broadly defined goods. Third, price elasticity tends to be higher for luxury items than for necessities. And finally, price elasticity tends to be higher in the long run than the short run. So now let's look at the intuition behind these guiding principles. So the intuition behind why price elasticity is higher when there are close substitutes available is that if a good has close substitutes, there are other products that consumers can switch to that fulfill the same purpose. So an example of this is Cocoa Puffs. Right? Cocoa Puffs have lots of close substitutes, right? Because Cocoa Puffs have lots of close substitutes, namely any other breakfast food. So other cereals, pancakes, Pop-Tarts, etc. So when the price of Cocoa Puffs rises, consumers can easily switch to any of these other things, and they just might not buy as many Cocoa Puffs, right? So we say the price elasticity for Cocoa Puffs is higher because of that. On the other end of the spectrum, we have something like sunscreen, right, which protects your skin. What are the substitutes that protect your skin from the sun? Well, there's not many. Maybe a shirt. You can wear a shirt instead of putting sunscreen on, or maybe an umbrella. But in general, there aren't very many close substitutes that fulfill the role that sunscreen does. And so when the price rises, people will still tend to buy it, given that their alternatives are not very good. So our second guiding principle is that price elasticity is higher for narrowly defined goods compared to broadly defined goods. So the intuition is that for narrowly defined goods, there are many substitutes, but for broadly defined goods, it's hard to find a good substitute. So for example, we could have blue jeans, which is a good, or we could say clothes in general. Blue jeans have lots of substitutes. We've got shorts, khakis, a Speedo, right? Things that cover your lower body. Whereas clothes, there's not really many substitutes, right? Maybe the only substitute may be just moving to a nudist colony. So the point is, when there's narrowly defined goods, there's probably other goods that fulfill that same category, and so you can substitute to those, whereas the broad categories encompass most of the things that will fulfill that need, and so there's nothing to substitute away from. So our third guiding principle is that the price elasticity tends to be higher for luxury items than necessities. So the intuition is that luxury items, right, they're by definition superfluous or unnecessary. And so if the price increases, it's pretty easy to just purchase less of them without much consequence to your standard of living. We'll say that it's easy to purchase less without decrease in standard of living. On the other hand, necessities, right, by definition, you need them. And so it's not easy to purchase less of them without really impacting your quality of life. So we'll say less severely impacts quality of life. So an example would be, we'll say a yacht, which is a luxury item, right? If the price increases, it's easy to imagine people would just not purchase as many yachts. And the typical example in this case for necessity is insulin for a diabetic. If the price increases, they don't really have any choice but to buy it. And so you have no reduction in consumption. So our final guiding principle is that the price elasticity is higher in the long run compared to the short run. And by long run and short run, we just mean long and short time horizons. So a good example of this is gasoline. So let's say the price of gas increases, let's say by a factor of 10. And now think about what's going to happen on different time scales. So let's say tomorrow, well, tomorrow people still need to probably go to work, so they're going to buy gas anyway. And consumption's not going to decrease much. But if we say 10 years from now, well, 10 years from now, if gas stays this expensive, we're going to have new technology, probably lots of electric cars. People might move closer to work. And so in the long run, there's all these other ways you can reduce consumption. So that's why we say in the long run, it's easier to find a substitute for the good. And so the price elasticity is higher in the long run.